Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. There's a spot above my bed that looks different than the rest of the ceiling, slightly discolored, faintly curved. I used to think it was just water damage, but when I close my eyes, I feel something above me shift. Not move, shift, like the ceiling reshapes itself. Watching. I once woke up gasping for air, convinced I was being stared at. Not just looked at, examined, admired. There's something about the tension in the air now. It's not in the walls. It's in the ceiling. And every night, the curve deepens, as if it's smiling wider, just for me. I started noticing the smell first. Sweet, but wrong. Like flowers left too long in stagnant water. It drifts down from that curved patch when I'm trying to sleep, pooling around my pillow until I have to turn my head away. But even when I face the wall, I can feel the weight of attention pressing down on my shoulders, seeping through the blanket. The discoloration has grown since I first noticed it. What began as a faint yellowing now spreads in organic tendrils across the white paint, forming something that almost resembles a mouth. I tell myself it's just moisture damage, expanding as humidity changes. But moisture doesn't explain why the mark feels warm when I stand on the bed and press my palm against it. I've started keeping a notebook beside my bed, documenting the changes. The curve measures differently each morning, sometimes by millimeters, sometimes by full inches. The yellowing spreads in patterns that seem too deliberate to be random. I sketch the shapes, noting how they branch and merge like neural pathways or blood vessels. The drawings look back at me from the pages, and I have to close the notebook quickly. My phone camera won't capture it properly. The images come out blurred, as if something is interfering with the focus. But I can hear it when I hold the device up toward the ceiling. A soft static that pulses in rhythm with my heartbeat, occasionally breaking into what sounds like whispered words in a language I don't recognize. The vibrations started 3 nights ago, barely perceptible at first, just a gentle tremor in the mattress that I attributed to the upstairs neighbors. But the building is only 2 stories, and I live on the top floor. When I press my ear to the wall, I can hear it more clearly. A low thrumming that seems to come from directly overhead, as if something large is breathing just beyond the plaster. I moved the bed to the opposite wall, but the sensation followed me. The curved patch above my new sleeping position began developing the same discoloration within hours. The same sweet, rotting smell descended. The same warm touch when I reached up to investigate. It's not the room that's wrong. It's whatever is learning to mimic the ceiling above me. Sleep has become a negotiation. I lie still, controlling my breathing, trying not to acknowledge the presence that hovers just inches from my face. But my body betrays me. My pulse quickens. My skin grows damp with nervous sweat. And that's when I feel it respond, the ceiling shifting and settling like something satisfied. I bought a mirror and held it above my face while lying in bed. The reflection showed nothing unusual, just white paint and the familiar water stain. But when I looked directly up, the curve was deeper, more pronounced. The yellowing had spread into something that definitely resembled a smile. A wide, patient smile that seemed to grow more distinct the longer I stared. The notebook is full now. Pages of measurements, sketches, and observations that document something impossible. The ceiling is alive, or something is living in it. Something that has learned my schedule, my breathing patterns, my sleep cycles. Something that waits for me to close my eyes before it leans down closer. I tried sleeping on the couch, but I woke up to find the living room ceiling sporting a fresh curve directly above me. The kitchen ceiling developed one too, right over the table where I eat breakfast. It's following me, learning me, adapting to my routines with the patience of something that has nowhere else to be. The whispers are clearer now. Not words exactly, but sounds that bypass my ears and speak directly to something deeper in my mind. They come when I'm half asleep, when my defenses are down. They sound almost affectionate, like someone murmuring endearments to a beloved pet. I understand now that moving won't help. This isn't about the apartment or the building or even the ceiling itself. It's about me. Something has chosen me, claimed me, and it's not bound by walls or roofs or any physical limitations I once thought mattered. The curve above my bed is a full smile now, stretching almost from wall to wall. The yellowing has deepened to brown, then to something darker. When I lie down, I can see it watching me with an attention so intense it makes my skin crawl. But I have to sleep somewhere. I have to close my eyes eventually. And when I do, I feel it lean down closer. Close enough that I can sense the warmth of its breath, if it has breath. close enough that I can almost feel lips brushing against my forehead. Almost. The notebook sits on my nightstand, open to a fresh page. Tomorrow, I'll document how the smile has grown overnight, how it's learned to curve in just the right way to seem welcoming instead of threatening, how it's teaching me to find comfort in its presence, to crave the attention it gives me when the room is dark and quiet. Because the terrible truth is this: I'm starting to smile back. Story 2. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just cleaning, moving things around, trying to make space. That's when I noticed the outline, barely visible behind the shelf. A door with no handle, no frame, just a thin seam. I pressed it. It opened. What I saw wasn't a new room. It was a memory. My drawings pinned to a wall I'd never seen. A cup I used to drink from as a child. My handwriting, but aged. The room smelled like me, felt like me, but I never built it. I never found it before. So how does it already know who I am? The air inside feels thick, like breathing through fabric. My fingers trace the wall where my childhood drawings hang. Crayoned houses with crooked chimneys. Stick figures holding hands under angular suns. The paper is yellowed, brittle at the edges, but I remember making each one. The blue crayon I used for the sky was always my favorite. I can still feel its waxy texture under my small fingers, but these drawings should be gone. I threw them away years ago during a move, watched them disappear into a garbage bag with other forgotten pieces of childhood. Yet here they are, preserved like artifacts in a museum of my own making. The tape holding them to the wall has that particular shade of amber that comes from decades of aging. I step deeper into the room. The floorboards creak in a rhythm I recognize, the same sequence of groans that my childhood bedroom floor made when I would sneak across it during the night. But this isn't my childhood bedroom. This is something else entirely. Something that exists in the spaces between memory and reality. On a small wooden table sits the ceramic cup with the faded cartoon character on its side. I remember the weight of it in my hands, the way the handle fit perfectly between my thumb and forefinger. I used to drink chocolate milk from it every morning before school. The rim still bears the faintest stain where my lips would touch. A ghost of countless mornings I thought I'd forgotten. I pick up the cup. It's warm. That's when I notice the notebook lying open beside it. The pages are filled with my handwriting, but not as it is now. This is my handwriting as it would have been if I'd never stopped writing the way I did as a child, careful, deliberate letters that lean slightly to the right. The way I was taught before I developed the hurried scrawl of adulthood. The entries are dated, but the dates make no sense. They span years I haven't lived yet, describing days I haven't experienced. Yet the voice in the writing is unmistakably mine, detailing conversations I've never had, places I've never been, feelings I've never felt but somehow recognize. I read one entry aloud, and my voice sounds different in this space, younger, more hesitant, like I'm trying to remember how to speak. The words describe a dream about finding a room behind a shelf, a dream where I discover traces of myself I never knew existed. The handwriting trembles slightly, as if the person writing it was afraid of what they might find. A sound draws my attention, a soft humming coming from behind me. I turn, but there's nothing there except the wall with my drawings. The humming continues, a melody I know but can't place. It's the kind of tune you might hum to yourself when you're alone and think no one is listening. The kind that emerges from some deep, unconscious part of your mind. I follow the sound to a corner where a small wooden chest sits partially hidden in shadow. The wood is worn smooth, darkened by years of handling. When I lift the lid, the hinges move silently, as if they've been recently oiled. Inside, I find objects I haven't seen in years. A broken watch that belonged to my grandfather. A seashell from a beach I visited once as a child. A photograph of someone I can't quite remember, but whose face feels familiar. But underneath these familiar objects, I discover something that makes my breath catch. It's a key, brass, old-fashioned, with intricate engravings along its length. I know this key. I've dreamed about it, but I've never seen it before in waking life. The key fits perfectly in my palm, warm against my skin, like it's been waiting for me to find it. Without thinking, I look around the room for a lock it might open. That's when I notice the second door, this one built into the far wall, so seamlessly integrated that it's almost invisible. Unlike the first door, this one has a keyhole. As I approach, the humming grows louder, more insistent. The melody is clearer now, and I realize it's a song I used to sing to myself as a child when I was scared or lonely. But I never taught it to anyone. I never even remembered it until this moment. The key slides into the lock with a soft click that seems to echo through dimensions I can't see. Before I can turn it, I hear footsteps, light, careful footsteps that sound exactly like my own. They're coming from behind the door. I turn the key. The door opens onto darkness, but not the absence of light. This is the kind of darkness that has weight, that presses against your skin like velvet. And from within that darkness, I hear my own voice calling my name, not the name others call me, but the secret name I gave myself as a child, the one I never spoke aloud to anyone. The voice is patient, kind, but there's an urgency underneath it that makes my heart race. It's asking me to come closer, to step through the doorway into whatever lies beyond. And part of me wants to. Part of me recognizes that darkness as home, but I hesitate. Something in my adult mind rebels against the invitation, screams warnings about spaces that shouldn't exist and voices that know too much. I pull back from the doorway, but the key remains in my hand, and I can feel it growing warmer, almost hot against my palm. The room around me begins to change. The walls seem to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. The drawings on the wall shift slightly, the crayon figures turning their heads to look at me with eyes that hold recognition and something that might be disappointment. I back toward the original door, but when I reach for where it should be, my hand meets solid wall. The outline that was so clear when I entered has vanished, leaving me sealed inside this space that knows me better than I know myself. The humming has stopped. The footsteps have stopped. Even my own breathing seems muffled in the sudden silence. But I can feel something watching me, waiting to see what I'll do next. I look down at the key in my hand. It's no longer warm. It's cold now, so cold it almost burns. And I realize that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Some rooms, once discovered, never let you leave completely. I'm still in that room. Part of me always will be. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between waking and sleeping, I can hear my own voice calling from the darkness beyond the second door. Still patient, still kind, still waiting for me to come home to a place I never knew existed, but that has always been waiting for me to find it. The key is still in my pocket. It's always in my pocket now, a constant reminder of the room that knew me before I knew myself, the room that holds all the pieces of who I was and who I might become. The room that exists in the space between memory and possibility, between what was and what could be. And I know that someday I'll use it again. Story 3. I have a desk I never use. It's more decorative than functional. But lately, one of the drawers won't stay shut. I close it. It opens. Not all the way, just enough to tempt curiosity. I finally opened it fully, and it was empty, completely. But I felt something inside, a shift in pressure, a flutter like fingers brushing against fabric. When I reached in, the bottom felt warm, pulsing. Not alive exactly, but aware. Since then, I hear faint sliding noises at night. And sometimes, I wake up to find the drawer fully open, waiting. The desk belonged to my grandmother. Dark mahogany, carved legs, brass handles tarnished with age. It sits in the corner of my study, mostly holding books I pretend to read and papers I never organize. The drawer in question is the middle one, perfectly aligned with where I sit when I actually use the chair. For months, it remained closed, forgotten, until it decided otherwise. The first time it happened, I blamed the house settling. Old wood expands and contracts. Physics, logic. But the drawer opened with such deliberate slowness that I found myself watching it, mesmerized. The brass handle caught the afternoon light, casting a thin golden line across the wall that moved like a sundial as the drawer crept outward. I pushed it closed, firmly. The wood made a satisfying click against the frame. Within minutes, I heard the whisper of metal against metal, the soft scrape of wood on wood. The drawer was opening again. This continued for days. Close, open, close, open. I started paying attention to the rhythm. It wasn't random. The drawer would remain closed for exactly the amount of time it took me to become absorbed in something else. Reading, working, cooking. The moment my attention wandered, I'd hear that familiar sound. I began keeping a notebook, documenting the intervals. The drawer seemed to know when I was watching, when I wasn't. It never moved under direct observation, but the instant I looked away, even for a heartbeat, it would resume its slow, patient opening. The notebook entries became obsessive. I recorded everything. The weather, what I was wearing, what I'd eaten, the temperature in the room. Nothing correlated. Nothing explained why this piece of furniture had developed such persistent behavior. On the 7th day, I decided to investigate properly. I pulled the drawer all the way out, expecting to find a broken track or warped wood. Instead, I found emptiness so complete it felt intentional. The interior was lined with faded green felt, worn smooth by decades of use. Nothing else. No mechanism. No explanation. But when I placed my hand inside, the felt felt wrong. Not just old, but expectant. Like skin waiting for touch. The surface was warmer than it should have been, warmer than the room, warmer than my hand. I pressed my palm flat against the bottom, and I swear I felt something press back. Not hard, not violent, just acknowledgement. I yanked my hand away and shoved the drawer closed so hard the entire desk shuddered. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Then silence. Complete, unnatural silence. Even the usual house sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, the settling of beams, had stopped. That night, I moved my pillow to the couch in the living room. I told myself it was because the bedroom was too warm. But really, I didn't want to sleep in the same room as the desk. The couch faced away from the study, but I could still hear it. The soft, rhythmic sliding. Open, pause, close. Open, pause, close. Like breathing. I tried to ignore it, pulling a pillow over my head. But the sound seemed to grow louder the more I fought it. Eventually, I gave up and walked to the study doorway. The drawer was fully extended, hanging in the darkness like an open mouth. I stepped closer, and the sliding stopped. The house held its breath. I reached for the drawer handle, intending to slam it shut, but something made me pause. The darkness inside wasn't empty anymore. It was full, dense, watching. I could feel attention focused on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I backed away and returned to the couch, but sleep was impossible. Every few minutes, I'd hear that sound, the drawer opening, always opening, never closing on its own. The next morning, I found scratches on the inside of the drawer. Fresh scratches, deep gouges in the felt, as if something had been clawing to get out, or to get in. The scratches formed no pattern I could recognize, but they seemed deliberate, purposeful. I bought a small digital recorder and placed it inside the drawer before closing it. Maybe I could capture whatever was happening. The recorder ran for 4 hours before the battery died. When I played it back, I heard my own voice, distorted and layered, speaking words I'd never said. The words weren't in any language I recognized, but they felt familiar, like something I'd once known but forgotten. The recorder's display showed temperature readings that spiked and dropped without pattern. The audio was filled with whispers, sighs, and something that might have been laughter. But underneath it all was a sound I couldn't identify. Wet, organic, like something growing. I started avoiding the study entirely, but the drawer's behavior escalated. It began opening wider, staying open longer. Sometimes I'd find it fully extended when I came home from work, as if it had been waiting all day. The scratches inside multiplied, covering every surface of the felt lining. The house began to smell different. Not bad exactly, but wrong. Like flowers left too long in water. Sweet decay. The smell was strongest near the desk, but it started to follow me. I'd catch whiffs of it in the kitchen, the bathroom, even outside. I considered throwing the desk away, but every time I approached it with that intention, something stopped me. The drawer would close itself gently, as if sensing my thoughts. The scratches would fade. The smell would dissipate. The desk would return to being just furniture, until I changed my mind. Then everything would resume. I started sleeping in the study, in the chair facing the desk. I told myself it was to monitor the situation, but really, I was drawn to it. The drawer's behavior had become hypnotic. I'd watch it open and close, like a mouth trying to speak. Sometimes I thought I could almost understand what it was trying to say. The scratches began to look like letters. Not any alphabet I knew, but they had structure, grammar. I started copying them into my notebook, trying to decode them. The more I studied them, the more sense they made. They weren't random. They were instructions or invitations. Last night, I woke up to find myself standing in front of the open drawer, my hand extended toward the darkness inside. I have no memory of getting up, no memory of walking across the room. But there I was, reaching into that impossible space, feeling the warmth pulse against my palm like a heartbeat. The drawer isn't empty anymore. I can feel what's inside, even when I can't see it. Something patient. Something that's been waiting much longer than I've been alive. Something that's been calling to me through the scratches, through the whispers, through the warm, pulsing darkness. I understand now why the drawer opens. It's not broken, It's working exactly as intended. The desk wasn't just my grandmother's. It was her grandmother's too, and her grandmother's before that. Each generation, someone has to sit in the chair. Someone has to watch the drawer. Someone has to listen to what's inside. The scratches spell out names. All the names of the women who sat in this chair before me. All the women who reached into the darkness and felt it reach back. All the women who learned what I'm learning now. The drawer is open. It's always open now. And I can feel something stirring inside. Something that's been waiting for me to understand. Waiting for me to stop fighting and start listening. My hand is moving toward the drawer again. I can't stop it. I don't want to stop it. The warmth is spreading up my arm, into my chest, into my mind. The whispers are getting clearer. The instructions are becoming commands. And somewhere in the darkness, something is finally ready to emerge. Story 4. It started with small things. The reflection showing my hand reaching for something I hadn't touched yet, or a face I hadn't made yet. But one morning it showed me crying. Broken, alone, I was fine standing there. But my reflection was wrecked. Something in me cracked that day. I can't stop checking now, every hour, every moment, hoping I'll see something better. But it only ever shows me the aftermath. The silence after I say something I shouldn't have. The emptiness after I leave. It knows what I'll regret. And it doesn't warn me. It just watches. The bathroom mirror had been installed last month. Nothing special about it. Standard silver backing, clean edges, mounted perfectly level against the pale wall. I'd chosen it myself from the hardware store, carried it home, hung it with careful precision. But standing there that first morning, brushing my teeth in the soft dawn light, I noticed something odd. My reflection moved a fraction of a second before I did. I stopped mid-brush, foam still clinging to my lips. My reflection stopped too, but there was something in its eyes, a weariness I didn't feel yet, a sadness that hadn't settled into my bones. I blinked hard, shook my head, attributed it to morning grogginess. Mirrors don't lie. Everyone knows that. They show what is, not what will be. But the feeling lingered like smoke in my chest. The next incident happened during lunch. I was heating soup in the microwave, humming some forgotten tune, when I caught my reflection in the chrome surface. My face looked strained, eyes red-rimmed as if I'd been crying. I touched my cheeks, completely dry. The reflection touched its cheeks too, the tears were still there, glistening tracks down its face like snail trails on glass. I pressed my palm against the microwave door, and the metal felt warm, almost fevered. The reflection pressed back, but its hand trembled in a way mine didn't. When I pulled away, condensation had formed where we'd touched, creating a perfect handprint that slowly dissolved into nothing. That evening, I found myself avoiding reflective surfaces. The television screen when it was off, the darkened windows, even the polished surface of my coffee table. But the bathroom mirror called to me with magnetic insistence. I had to brush my teeth, wash my face, perform the basic rituals of human maintenance. Standing before it again, I saw myself as I was, tired but functional, slightly disheveled from the day's work. But in the periphery of the reflection, shadows moved wrong. They stretched and contracted like living things, reaching toward the mirror's surface from impossible angles. When I turned to look directly, they snapped back to their proper positions, casting innocuous shapes from familiar objects. I began documenting these occurrences in a small notebook, writing down each instance with clinical precision. The mirror showing me covering my mouth as if I'd said something terrible. The reflection of my hands clenched into fists, while mine remained relaxed at my sides. The way my reflected eyes would sometimes track movement in the room that I couldn't see. The notebook filled quickly. Page after page of observations, each more disturbing than the last. I started taking photographs, trying to capture the discrepancies, but the camera only showed normal reflections. The mirror seemed to perform properly for mechanical eyes, reserving its peculiar honesty for human observation alone. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie in bed listening to the house settle, wondering if reflections continued their strange performances in the dark. Sometimes I'd hear soft sounds from the bathroom, a gentle tapping, like fingernails against glass. When I investigated, I'd find the mirror perfectly normal, showing only my anxious face peering around the doorframe. The progression was subtle but relentless. My reflection began showing me moments of profound isolation, sitting alone at my kitchen table, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, standing in empty rooms with my arms wrapped around myself, trying to hold something together that had already fallen apart. The mirror was becoming a window into futures I desperately wanted to avoid. I started changing my behavior, trying to outsmart whatever force was manipulating my reflection. If I saw myself looking defeated, I'd force a smile and straighten my shoulders. If the mirror showed me alone, I'd call friends, make plans, fill my calendar with social obligations. But the reflection always adapted, showing me the aftermath of these forced interactions, the hollow feeling after fake laughter, the deeper loneliness that followed superficial connections. The mirror's temperature began to fluctuate. Sometimes it felt ice cold against my fingertips, other times warm enough to fog with my breath. The glass would vibrate slightly when I touched it, like a tuning fork struck too softly to hear. These physical changes made the phenomenon impossible to dismiss as mere psychological projection. I brought others to witness what I was experiencing. A friend came over for dinner, and I casually suggested we check our appearance in the bathroom mirror. She saw nothing unusual, complimented the mirror's clarity, asked where I'd purchased it. Her reflection behaved normally, showing her exactly as she was. No temporal displacement, no emotional discrepancy. The mirror seemed to save its peculiar talents for me alone. This exclusivity made me question everything. Was I losing my mind? Were these hallucinations symptoms of some deeper psychological break? I scheduled appointments with doctors, underwent tests, submitted to psychological evaluations. Everything came back normal. Physically and mentally, I was perfectly healthy, but the mirror knew better. It began showing me the consequences of my growing obsession. My reflection would stand in the same bathroom, but older, more haggard. Dark circles under eyes that had seen too much. Hair thinner, posture more defeated. The mirror was showing me what this investigation was costing me, what it would continue to cost. I tried covering the mirror with a towel, but the fabric would slip during the night, pooling on the floor by morning. I attempted to remove it from the wall, but the mounting brackets wouldn't budge, as if they'd fused with the surface. The mirror had become a permanent fixture, an inescapable witness to my deteriorating state. The final revelation came during a particularly restless night. I found myself standing before the mirror in complete darkness, guided by some compulsion I couldn't name. The reflection was visible despite the absence of light, glowing with its own soft luminescence. In that ethereal glow, I saw myself in perfect clarity, not as I was, but as I would become. The reflection showed me reaching toward the mirror's surface, my fingers extended, desperate to touch something on the other side. The expression on my face was one of complete surrender, as if I'd finally accepted an invitation I'd been refusing for months. My reflection's lips were moving, speaking words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. It was explaining the rules of our relationship. The mirror didn't create the futures it showed. It simply revealed the inevitable consequences of choices not yet made. Every regret, every moment of solitude, every tear shed in private was already written in the subtle mathematics of human behavior. The mirror was merely a translator, making visible the emotional equations that governed my existence. I realized then that fighting the mirror was futile. It wasn't malevolent or supernatural. It was simply honest in a way that human consciousness couldn't normally process. It showed me truth displaced in time, consequences before causes, effects before actions. The mirror was a window into the emotional physics of cause and effect. As this understanding settled into my bones, I felt a strange peace. The mirror had been trying to prepare me, to show me what was coming so I could steel myself against it. But I'd interpreted its honesty as threat, its warnings as attacks. The mirror hadn't been showing me futures to prevent. It had been showing me futures to accept. Standing there in the darkness, I understood that the reflection reaching toward the glass wasn't a future version of myself. It was a current version, reaching across the boundary between cause and effect, trying to comfort the person I'd been before I understood what the mirror was really showing me. I pressed my palm against the cool surface, and my reflection pressed back. For the first time since this began, we moved in perfect synchronization. The mirror no longer showed me what I'd regret. It showed me what I'd already accepted. The tears in my reflection's eyes were tears of relief, not sorrow, but something had changed in that moment of acceptance. The mirror's surface began to ripple like water, my reflection wavering as if seen through disturbed liquid. The glass was losing its solidity, becoming something more fluid, more permeable. My reflection was no longer trapped behind the surface. It was free to move, to reach, to cross the boundary I thought was absolute. And in that final moment of understanding, I realized the mirror had been showing me one last regret all along. Not the tears I'd shed or the loneliness I'd feel. But the moment I'd finally understand what the mirror was offering and why I'd eventually accept. The reflection's hand pushed through the surface, fingers breaking through what had once been solid glass. The mirror showed me what I'd regret, not the choice I was about to make, but the fact that I'd taken so long to make it. The hand extended toward me, patient and familiar, waiting for me to take it. I reached back, and the mirror showed me no future at all. Only the present moment, stretched thin and eternal, where reflections finally meet their sources, and the boundary between what is and what will be dissolves completely. The mirror went dark, but I remained standing there, my hand extended toward a surface that no longer reflected anything. In the silence that followed, I understood that some regrets are necessary, that some futures can only be experienced, never prevented. The mirror still hangs in my bathroom, perfectly normal to any observer. But I know better now. I know that it's watching, waiting, ready to show the next person what they'll regret, ready to offer the same choice I eventually made. And sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of movement in its surface, a hand reaching out, patient and familiar, waiting for someone new to finally understand what the mirror is really showing them. Story 5. I used to love the patterns, delicate, swirling, harmless. But recently, I noticed something strange. After certain conversations, the designs subtly shift. The curls sharpen. The lines grow jagged. One night, I lied to a friend on the phone. When I looked up, the wall was bleeding. Not literal blood, just red streaks embedded into the pattern. The next day, it faded back. I tested it again. Lied to myself in the mirror. The wallpaper warped like skin being stretched. I don't think it hates lies. I think it feeds on them. The wallpaper had been there when I moved in. Vintage, the landlord had said, authentic to the period. Cream-colored base with intricate botanical patterns, vines that seemed to dance across the surface, leaves that caught the light just right. I'd grown fond of tracing the designs with my eyes during quiet evenings, following the endless loops and spirals that seemed to flow from one wall to another without interruption. The first change happened after I called in sick to work. Nothing dramatic, just a small lie, the kind everyone tells. I was perfectly healthy, just needed a mental health day. As I hung up the phone, I noticed the vine nearest the window had developed a slight twist, a kink that hadn't been there before. I rubbed my eyes, thinking fatigue was playing tricks on me. When I looked again, it appeared normal. But that evening, as I sat reading, I kept glancing at that spot. The twist was still there, barely perceptible, like a muscle cramp in the pattern itself. I pressed my palm against the wall. The paper felt warm, almost feverish, and seemed to pulse gently under my touch. I pulled my hand away quickly, leaving a damp print that faded within moments. The next morning, the wallpaper looked exactly as it always had. Perfect, symmetrical, peaceful. I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress, perhaps. The new job, the unfamiliar surroundings. My mind was simply adjusting to the space. Then my mother called. She wanted to visit, and I wasn't ready. The apartment was still mostly boxes, and I hadn't been sleeping well. The shadows under my eyes told stories I didn't want to explain. So I told her I'd been traveling for work, wouldn't be back for another week. As the words left my mouth, I watched the wall behind my reflection in the hallway mirror. The botanical pattern began to contort, leaves curling inward like dying flowers, vines tightening into knots. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, happening in real time as I spoke. I ended the call abruptly and approached the wall. The paper felt different now, rougher, with raised ridges where the pattern had twisted. I ran my fingers along the affected area, feeling the texture change from smooth to almost sandpaper-like. The cream background had developed a yellowish tint, like old bruises. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house settle. But underneath those familiar sounds, I heard something else. A soft scratching, like fingernails on paper. It seemed to come from inside the walls themselves, a rhythmic scraping that grew stronger whenever I held my breath to listen more carefully. I started keeping a journal, documenting each incident. The wallpaper responded to lies, but not all lies equally. White lies, social pleasantries, telling the cashier I was fine when I wasn't. These caused minor ripples, barely noticeable shifts in the pattern. But deeper deceptions, the ones that carried weight, those created more dramatic changes. When I told my colleague I'd finished the project I'd barely started, an entire section of wall seemed to bubble and warp, as if something was pushing against it from behind. The floral motifs became sharp, angular, almost aggressive. The pleasant cream color darkened to an unsettling beige, that made my skin look sallow in the lamplight. I began to experiment, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't resist. I would stand in front of different walls and tell myself lies of varying magnitude, watching how the patterns responded. Small fabrications caused gentle undulations, like stones dropped in still water. Bigger lies created more violent reactions. The wallpaper would seem to writhe and pulse, the designs becoming distorted and almost painful to look at. The most disturbing part was how the changes felt intentional. The wallpaper wasn't just reacting, it was learning. It began to respond to lies I was only thinking before I'd even spoken them aloud. I would consider calling in sick again, and the wall would start to shift preemptively, the patterns tightening with anticipation. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the paper was sensitive to changes in humidity caused by my breathing patterns when I was nervous. Maybe the adhesive was old and reacted to temperature fluctuations. But deep down, I knew these explanations were insufficient. The wallpaper was aware, and it was hungry. The breakthrough came when I decided to test whether honesty had any effect. I called my mother back and told her the truth, that I was struggling with the move, that I needed more time to adjust before having visitors. As I spoke, I watched the wall carefully. The twisted vines began to relax, straightening and resuming their original graceful curves. The sickly yellow tint faded back to cream. The rough texture smoothed under my touch, but the relief was temporary. Within hours, the wallpaper returned to its corrupted state, as if truth was merely a temporary antidote to a chronic condition. The lies I'd already told had left permanent marks, scars in the pattern that honesty couldn't fully heal. I started lying more frequently, compulsively, just to see what would happen. I told delivery drivers I wasn't home when I was standing right behind the door. I invented stories about my weekend plans to neighbors. I lied to my reflection about how I was feeling, what I was thinking, what I wanted. With each deception, the wallpaper grew more distorted, more aggressive in its transformations. The patterns were no longer botanical. They had become something else entirely, writhing, organic shapes that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The cream background had darkened to a color that reminded me of old parchment, of skin that had been too long in the sun. The texture was now consistently rough, almost scaly, and warm to the touch regardless of the room temperature. The scratching sounds had evolved too. What had once been gentle scraping now sounded like frantic clawing, as if something was trying to break through from the other side. The sounds followed me from room to room, always seeming to come from whichever wall I was facing. I realized I was trapped in a cycle. The wallpaper's responses to my lies had become addictive. I craved the immediate, visible proof of my deception's power. But each lie made the next one easier, more necessary. I began lying about trivial things, what I'd eaten for breakfast, whether I'd checked the mail, if I'd slept well. The wallpaper absorbed each falsehood, growing stronger and more distorted with every feeding. The final transformation happened when I lied about lying. I told myself I was going to stop, that I would be honest from now on, knowing even as I thought it that it wasn't true. The wallpaper convulsed, the patterns writhing violently before settling into something that was no longer recognizable as decorative. The surface looked organic now, like skin with veins visible beneath. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard something that made my blood freeze. Whispering. Not the scratching sounds I'd grown accustomed to, but actual voices, layered and overlapping, repeating back every lie I'd ever told. My own voice, distorted and multiplied, creating a chorus of deception that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I tried to leave then, but every door I approached seemed to lead to another room with the same corrupted wallpaper. The patterns had spread beyond the original walls, covering every surface, pulsing and writhing in perfect synchronization. The apartment had become a living organism, and I was trapped inside its digestive system. Now I sit here, writing this account, wondering if documenting the truth will make any difference. The wallpaper watches me, its patterns shifting slightly with each word I type. Sometimes I catch glimpses of faces in the designs, distorted, anguished expressions that might be my own, reflected and multiplied across the surface. The whispers never stop now. They've become a constant background hum, a reminder of every deception I've ever crafted. And I know, with absolute certainty, that the wallpaper is no longer content to simply change. It's preparing for something else, something that will require more than just my lies to sustain it. I can feel it waiting, patient and hungry, ready to transform me just as I transformed it. The patterns pulse with anticipation, and I understand now that I was never the observer in this relationship. I was always the experiment, the subject being studied and shaped by something far more patient and cunning than I could have imagined. The wallpaper changes when I lie, but I think it's finished changing. Now it's my turn. Story 6. I know every inch of this place, or I thought I did. There's a hallway that doesn't align with the blueprints. I measured it, counted steps, drew it, but the math never matches. Some nights it's 3 steps too long. Others, it curves slightly, like it's stretching. There's no draft, no noise, just a pressure in the air. Like it knows I'm trying to trap it in logic. I tried filming it once. The footage was blank. I tried walking it backward. I ended up somewhere I don't recognize. I haven't gone back since. The morning I first noticed it, I was carrying a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I stood there, staring at the tape measure stretched across the hardwood floor. 42 inches. That's what it read. But my architectural drawings clearly showed 38 inches. I rewound the tape, measured again. Still 42. The metallic click of the tape retracting echoed strangely in the space, like it was bouncing off walls that weren't there. I pressed my palm against the wall, feeling the familiar texture of the paint I'd applied myself 3 years ago. The surface was warm, warmer than the adjacent rooms, and there was something else, a faint vibration, so subtle it might have been my pulse. But when I held my breath and focused, the tremor continued, rhythmic and patient, like breathing. The hallway connects my bedroom to the kitchen. Nothing unusual about that. Every house has hallways, but this one had started to feel different, like it was watching me walk through it. I began keeping a notebook, documenting my observations with the methodical precision I'd learned in my engineering studies. Length variations, temperature fluctuations, the way shadows seemed to linger longer here than in other parts of the house. On the 4th night of my documentation, I noticed the walls smelled faintly of cedar, though there was no wood paneling anywhere. The scent was strongest near the corner where the hallway turned toward the kitchen, concentrated in a spot about chest height. I leaned closer, inhaling deeply, and the smell shifted. Now it was something metallic, like old coins left in a drawer. I started walking the hallway differently, counting my steps aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 steps to reach the kitchen. But the next morning, counting again, It took 12. The distance hadn't changed visually. The walls looked the same. The photographs hung in their usual spots. But my feet told a different story. I brought out my phone and started recording video as I walked. The screen showed nothing but a gray static, though the phone was functioning perfectly. I could hear my own voice in the playback, counting steps, but the image remained an empty, shifting void. I tried different angles, different lighting conditions. The result was always the same technological blindness in a space that should have been mundane. Sleep became elusive. I would lie in bed, listening to the house settle, but the sounds seemed to originate from that hallway. Not footsteps, something more subtle, like fabric brushing against wallpaper, or fingers trailing along the baseboard. I would get up to investigate, but the hallway would be empty, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlight filtering through the kitchen window. The turning point came when I decided to walk the hallway backward. I reasoned that if space was somehow distorting, perhaps reversing my direction would reveal the mechanism. I started at the kitchen entrance, stepping carefully backward, counting each step. The familiar pressure in the air intensified. The walls seemed to pulse with that gentle vibration. The cedar scent returned, stronger now, mixed with something else, something that reminded me of rain on hot asphalt. At what should have been the 7th step, my foot found empty air. I stumbled, catching myself against a wall that felt different, rougher, older. When I turned around, I was standing in a room I had never seen before. The walls were covered in a faded floral wallpaper, and a single window looked out onto a landscape that wasn't my neighborhood. Rolling hills stretched into a gray sky, and in the distance, a church steeple pierced the horizon. I reached for the doorknob behind me, but there was no door, only wall. The panic that flooded through me was immediate and overwhelming. I pressed my hands against the wallpaper, feeling for seams, for any indication of how I had entered this space. The paper was damp beneath my fingers, and pieces of it came away in my hands, revealing old wood underneath. The room had a heaviness to it, like the air before a storm. I could hear my own breathing, amplified and echoing. I called out, though I'm not sure what I expected to hear in response. My voice seemed to absorb into the walls without returning. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, I found myself back in my hallway, standing exactly where I had started my backward journey. But something had changed. The photographs on the walls were slightly askew, as if the house had shifted while I was gone. The hardwood floors creaked differently under my feet, and in the corner where the cedar smell had been strongest, there was now a small scratch in the paint, a thin line that looked almost like a signature. I stopped measuring the hallway after that. I stopped documenting. I stopped trying to understand. But the hallway hasn't stopped changing. Sometimes I catch it in my peripheral vision, stretching longer than it should. Other times, I feel it watching me as I pass through, patient and knowing. The scratch in the paint has grown longer, curving slightly, like it's writing something I'm not ready to read. I still live here. I still walk through that hallway every day. But now I know there are rooms in my house that exist only when I'm not looking for them. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I can hear something moving in that other space, something that knows I found it and is waiting for me to come back. Story 7. It began with faint tapping, like a nail against porcelain, then scraping, then breathing, not fast, not urgent, just steady, curious. I removed the panel to check for pipes, maybe a rodent. But it wasn't hollow space, it was dirt, packed tightly with fresh scratch marks. Not claw marks, fingernails. Now, when I bathe, I feel movement. Not under the tub, below it. Something is digging upward, slow and careful, as if it's trying not to startle me. But it knows I know now, and I think it's getting closer. The sound started 3 weeks ago. I was soaking in warm water, eyes closed, when I heard it. Tap, 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 rhythmic, deliberate. I opened my eyes and listened. Nothing. Just the gentle lapping of water against the tub's edge. I convinced myself it was settling pipes, old building noises. Every home has them, but it returned the next evening. This time I was ready. I sat perfectly still, water cooling around me, listening. The tapping came again, but softer now, more careful, as if whatever was making the sound had learned I was paying attention. I pressed my ear against the tub's side. The porcelain felt cold, vibrating slightly with each tap. The sound wasn't coming from the walls or pipes. It was coming from directly below. I called a plumber. He arrived the following morning, a weathered man with calloused hands who'd seen every kind of household problem. He examined the bathroom, checked the pipes, ran water through the system. Everything looked normal. The tapping didn't happen while he was there. Of course it didn't. He left with a shrug and a bill, suggesting I monitor the situation. That evening, I decided to investigate myself. I found a small crowbar in my toolbox and carefully pried away the access panel beneath the tub. I expected to find a narrow space filled with pipes and maybe some insulation. Instead, I discovered something that made my hands shake. Dark, rich soil, packed tight against the underside of the tub, as if the earth itself had pushed up from below. And there, pressed into the dirt, were scratch marks, long, deliberate grooves that could only have been made by human fingernails. I called the plumber back. He didn't answer. I called a different one. He said he'd come the next day, but never showed. I began to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe stress from work, lack of sleep, too much caffeine. I decided to document everything. I took photos of the dirt, the scratch marks, measured the depth of the soil. It was real. The evidence was there. The tapping evolved. It became more complex, more purposeful. Sometimes it would stop completely when I entered the bathroom, as if something was listening for my footsteps. Other times, it would intensify when I approached the tub, like excitement, like anticipation. I started avoiding baths altogether, taking quick showers instead. But even then, I could hear it. Scraping now, not just tapping. The steady, patient sound of something digging upward. I began sleeping poorly. The sounds seemed to follow me from the bathroom to my bedroom. Faint scratching in the walls, movement beneath the floorboards. I'd wake and find myself standing in the hallway, listening. The scratching would stop the moment I became fully conscious, but I could feel something waiting, something that knew I was there. The smell started a week later, sweet and earthy, like fresh soil after rain, but with an underlying mustiness. It would drift from the bathroom in waves, strongest when the digging sounds were most active. I bought air fresheners, left windows open, scrubbed every surface. The smell persisted, growing stronger each day. It wasn't coming from the surfaces. It was seeping up from below. I decided to dig. If something was tunneling toward me, I would tunnel toward it. I spent hours chipping away at the packed earth beneath the tub, my hands cramping, dirt collecting under my nails. The soil was deeper than I'd expected, much deeper. And as I dug, the temperature dropped. Not the air temperature, but the earth itself. My fingers grew numb as I worked, and I noticed something else. The scratch marks weren't just on the surface. They continued down, following the same path I was creating. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the bathroom, listening. The digging sounds had changed. They were faster now, more urgent. And they were coming from directly below where I'd been digging, Whatever was down there knew I was trying to reach it, and it was trying to reach me too. The breakthrough came 3 days later. I was excavating the deepest part of the hole when my fingers touched something smooth and cold. Not dirt, not rock, something else. I cleared away more soil and found it. A hand, pale, perfectly preserved, reaching upward. The fingernails were long and sharp, caked with dirt. As I stared at it, the fingers twitched. Not a muscle spasm. A deliberate movement. A greeting. I jerked backward, heart racing. But I couldn't look away. The hand was moving more now, the fingers flexing, as if testing their mobility after a long confinement. I heard breathing, slow, deep breaths that seemed to come from the earth itself. The hand began to push upward, and I saw more. A wrist, a forearm. The soil around it crumbled away as if it were eager to release whatever was buried there. I ran from the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. But the sounds followed me, scraping, digging, breathing. And underneath it all, something else. A voice, not speaking words, but making sounds. Soft, curious sounds, like someone discovering the world for the first time. The sounds weren't coming from the bathroom anymore. They were coming from the walls, the floor, all around me. I packed a bag and left. I stayed in a hotel for a week, but the sounds found me there too. Faint tapping in the walls, scratching beneath the carpet. The smell of earth in the air conditioning. I realized then that leaving wouldn't solve anything. Whatever was digging had marked me. It knew my scent, my rhythm, my location. It would follow me wherever I went. I returned home to find the bathroom transformed. The hole I'd dug was gone, filled with fresh soil. But the tub itself had shifted. It sat lower now, settling into the ground as if the earth was slowly reclaiming it. The scratch marks were everywhere now. On the walls, the floor, the ceiling. And they were fresh. Deep gouges that spelled out a message I couldn't read, but somehow understood. I take baths again now. Not because I want to, but because I have to. The digging has stopped, but something else has started. The water gets warm by itself. The drain never clogs. And sometimes when I'm soaking, I feel gentle pressure against my back, like hands supporting me, keeping me safe. The breathing continues, but it's synchronized with mine now. We breathe together, whatever is below and I. The hand I found isn't in the dirt anymore. Sometimes I see it in the mirror behind me, waving. Sometimes I feel it touch my shoulder when I'm brushing my teeth. It's not threatening. It's almost protective, like it's been waiting for me specifically, like it's been digging toward me for a very long time, and now that it's found me, it doesn't want me to leave. I've stopped trying to understand what's happening. The scratch marks on the walls change daily, forming new patterns, new messages. The smell of earth is constant now, but I've grown to find it comforting. It smells like home, like safety, like something that has been waiting patiently for me to accept it. The digging beneath my bathtub has stopped, but that's only because whatever was digging has arrived. It's here now with me, part of my daily routine. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the bathroom, I find myself digging too. My fingernails are longer now, sharper, and I understand why. Soon, I'll be digging towards someone else, someone who needs to be found, someone who needs to come home. The tapping has started again, but this time it's coming from above. Story 8. It started as a vibration, a low hum like feedback from an old speaker. But it wasn't coming from around me, it was inside me, inside my jaw. My molars buzzed like they were trying to communicate. Then came the whispers, not words I could understand, just tones, rhythms. They rise when I'm quiet, pulse when I try to sleep. It's not tinnitus. It's not in my ears. It's in my teeth. And last night, for the first time, I understood one phrase. You were chosen for silence. I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth, trying to muffle the sensation. The ceramic crown on my upper left molar felt warm. Too warm. I'd gotten that crown replaced recently after a routine cleaning. The dentist mentioned something about unusual wear patterns, but I hadn't thought much of it. Now, running my tongue across its surface, I noticed a roughness I hadn't felt before, a texture that seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't paying attention. The whispers grew stronger when I touched the crown. Not louder, stronger. Like tuning into a radio station that was always there, just waiting for the right frequency. I grabbed my phone and opened the voice recorder app, pressing it close to my jaw. The recording played back silence, but I could still hear them, feel them vibrating through my skull. I made an appointment with my dentist the next morning. The receptionist's voice sounded distant, filtered, as if I were hearing her through water. During the examination, the dentist prodded the crown with his metal probe. Each tap sent a jolt of clarity through the whispers. For brief moments, I could almost make out syllables, fragments of meaning. Everything looks normal, he said, removing his gloves. No signs of infection or sensitivity. Sometimes stress can manifest in unusual ways, but I knew this wasn't stress. That evening, I sat in my bathroom with a small mirror, examining the crown under the bright vanity lights. The porcelain seemed to have tiny perforations, holes so small they were barely visible. When I breathed on the surface, creating condensation, the holes appeared more clearly. They formed a pattern, not random, deliberate. I took photos with my phone, zooming in as much as possible. The images showed nothing unusual, just a normal dental crown. But when I looked with my naked eye, the pattern was unmistakable. Dots and dashes, like Morse code, but not quite. The whispers intensified as I studied the markings, and I realized they were responding to my attention. Over the following days, I began documenting everything. The whispers were strongest in the early morning and late evening. They seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat during moments of stress. I started keeping a journal, noting the patterns, the intensity, the way they seemed to react to my thoughts. The breakthrough came when I was eating dinner. I bit down on a piece of crusty bread, and the whispers suddenly became clear. Not just one voice, but many. Overlapping conversations in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. They were discussing me, analyzing my responses, recording my reactions. I spit out the bread and ran to the bathroom, grabbing a pair of tweezers from the medicine cabinet. If there was something inside the crown, I needed to see it. I positioned myself under the light and opened my mouth wide, trying to get a better view of the surface. The perforations were larger now, more obvious, and inside them I could see movement. Tiny, mechanical movements. The whispers grew agitated as I brought the tweezers closer. They shifted from their usual murmur to something more urgent, more warning. I hesitated, the metal tips hovering near the crown. Then I heard it clearly in my own voice. Don't. I dropped the tweezers. They clattered into the sink, the sound echoing strangely in the small bathroom. The whispers fell silent, complete silence. For the first time in weeks, my jaw was quiet. But the absence of sound was worse than the whispers had been. It felt like holding my breath underwater, waiting for something to break the surface. I picked up the tweezers again, steadying my hand. If I could just remove whatever was inside the crown, I could end this. The whispers returned, but different now. Multiple voices speaking in unison, all saying the same thing. You were chosen for silence. I pressed the tweezers against the crown and felt it give way slightly. The porcelain surface was softer than it should have been, yielding like skin. The whispers became a roar, filling my skull with overlapping voices, conversations, data streams. I could hear my own thoughts being repeated back to me, analyzed, catalogued. The crown cracked, not like porcelain, but like an eggshell. Clear fluid leaked from the fracture, tasting metallic on my tongue. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a high-pitched whine that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth. In the mirror, I could see the crown was intact. Perfect. No cracks, no fluid. But I could taste the metallic residue on my tongue, feel the warm liquid running down my throat. The whispers were gone, but something else had taken their place. A presence, watching, waiting. I've stopped trying to remove the crown. The whispers haven't returned, but the silence is worse. I can feel them listening, processing, learning. Sometimes I catch myself about to speak, then stopping, as if something is preventing me from forming words, as if I'm being trained. The strangest part is the dreams. I dream of others like me, sitting in quiet rooms, their mouths sealed, their thoughts being harvested. We're all connected by invisible threads, part of something larger. In the dreams, I understand why I was chosen, not for what I could say, but for what I could never say again. I still have the crown. I still feel the presence. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, I hear new whispers. Not from my teeth this time, but from the walls, the pipes, the electrical wiring. They're spreading, finding new hosts, new voices to silence. The strangest thing is that I don't want to warn anyone. The urge to speak, to share what I've learned, grows weaker each day. Soon, I think, I won't want to speak at all. And maybe that's the point. Maybe silence is exactly what I was chosen for. Story 9. It used to open outward, a standard door, creaky but normal. Now it pulls inward into itself. The hinges didn't change, the frame didn't move, but the door opens wrong. When I close it, I hear a rustling from within, not clothes breathing. I tried to wedge it shut. The next morning, it was open again, wider than it should be. The light doesn't reach far inside anymore, like it's grown deeper, like it's not a closet anymore. I don't know where it leads, but I keep catching glimpses glimpses of my own belongings, rearranged inside, like someone's waiting for me to step in. The change happened gradually, which made it worse somehow. First, I noticed the door handle felt warmer than usual when I gripped it. Not hot, just wrong. Body temperature when it should have been cool metal. I dismissed it as my imagination running wild from too many sleepless nights. Then came the sound, a soft scratching, like fingernails dragging against fabric. I convinced myself it was mice, maybe rats. Old buildings have their problems. But when I pressed my ear against the door, the scratching stopped. Complete silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. I started keeping a journal, documenting each anomaly. Day 1, door handle warm. Day 3, scratching sounds. Day 7, the door was slightly ajar when I woke up, though I distinctly remembered closing it firmly before bed. Day 10, my favorite sweater was hanging on the wrong side of the closet, folded differently than I ever fold anything. The temperature in my room began to fluctuate without explanation. Cool drafts would sweep across my ankles when I walked past the closet, as if air was flowing from somewhere else entirely, somewhere vast and hollow. I checked for gaps around the door frame, ran my fingers along every edge. Nothing. Solid construction. But the air kept moving. I purchased a small recorder, one of those digital devices that activates with sound. I placed it inside the closet before bed, nestled between my winter coats. When I retrieved it the next morning, it had captured 6 hours of audio, mostly silence, punctuated by that familiar scratching. But around the 3-hour mark, there was something else. A voice, barely audible, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The tone was conversational, as if someone was explaining something to a companion just out of range. I played it back dozens of times, adjusting the volume, filtering the static. The words remained elusive, but the cadence was unmistakable. Human speech, coming from inside a closet that backed up to an exterior wall. Sleep became impossible. I would lie in bed, staring at the door, waiting for it to move. And it did move. Not obviously, not dramatically. A millimeter at a time, like it was breathing. Open, closed, open, closed. So slowly that I questioned my own perception. During the day, I tried to rationalize everything. Building settling. Seasonal wood expansion. Auditory hallucinations from stress. But at night, with the room dark and quiet, the explanations felt thin and desperate. I decided to wedge the door shut permanently. I found a rubber doorstop, the kind that seemed impossible to dislodge once properly positioned. I hammered it into place, really drove it deep under the door. The fit was perfect, secure. The door couldn't budge. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. But I woke to find the doorstop on my nightstand, placed carefully next to my reading glasses. The door hung open, revealing a darkness that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. I approached slowly, phone flashlight in hand, and aimed the beam inside. The closet was deeper than before, definitely deeper. The back wall, which I could always touch with my outstretched arm, now lay somewhere beyond the reach of my light. My clothes hung in the foreground, but behind them, shadows shifted and moved like living things. I stepped inside. The floor felt different under my feet. Not the hardwood that ran throughout my room, but something softer, organic, like walking on